The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The boats came around the headland at dusk. 11-year-olds, 23 of them, packed 4 to a vessel in the way small boats always pack children. Knees touching, elbows competing for space. The smell of cold lake water and damp wool, and the specific anxious sweat of people who have been told something extraordinary is about to happen. Hagrid's lantern swung at the prow of the lead boat, throwing orange light across black water in a rhythm that matched no particular pattern. Then the boats came around the headland and the castle appeared. In most accounts of this moment, passed down through generations of Hogwarts families in the fragments and inadequate shorthand of people trying to describe something that resisted description. The castle simply appeared, sudden and enormous, lit against the dark sky. This was not quite what happened on the 1st of September 1991. What happened was that the castle appeared, and then, for 3 full seconds, it changed. Not dramatically. Not with theatrical fire or any visible magic the other children would remember describing afterward. The castle's reflection in the black water shifted first. The cold, inverted mirror image it had been casting across the lake's surface shimmered, reorganized itself, and burned instead with a warm blue and gold radiance, like a lighthouse built for a frequency of light that did not normally exist. Harry felt it in his chest before he saw it with his eyes. Not warmth exactly, something more structural than warmth. A resonance. The sensation of a bell that had struck so long ago that its sound had become the background frequency of the universe, something he had always been hearing and had never noticed until the precise moment it shifted into a register he could consciously identify. He pressed his hand against his sternum without realizing he was doing it, as if he could locate the source of the thing by touch. Across the water, in another boat, a girl with bushy brown hair went entirely still. She had been reading until the moment the boats rounded the headland, a book about Hogwarts founding enchantments, borrowed from a shop in Diagon Alley and annotated in her own dense, arguing hand. The book was closed now, held against her chest with both arms, and she was looking at the castle with an expression that was not awe exactly. It was recognition, the expression of someone who has been trying to locate something for a long time and has just found it in an unexpected place. She turned, and her eyes found Harry across the black water. They had never met. They had not spoken. They did not know each other's names. What passed between them in that moment was not about each other. It was about the castle. The thing they had both just felt. The resonance, the bell sound, the 3 seconds of blue and gold light had arrived in both of them at precisely the same frequency, and the simultaneity of it was its own form of introduction. 2 people who have heard the same unheard sound know something about each other that cannot easily be explained to anyone who hasn't heard it too. The light faded. The castle returned to its ordinary, extraordinary appearance. Hagrid kept swinging his lantern, and the other children kept gasping or going silent, or gripping the sides of the boats. Neither Harry nor the girl with the book looked away from the castle for the rest of the crossing. The entrance hall was cold marble and moving staircases, the first proof for most of these children that architecture obeyed different laws here. Professor McGonagall gave them the same speech she had given for 30 years. Houses, points, the sorting, the Great Hall. "Follow me, please," Harry followed with everyone else, still feeling the bell sound under his ribs. The Great Hall's ceiling was the actual evening sky, and the sight of it after years of Privet Drive's low ceilings hit Harry somewhere below his sternum and taught him, fully and physically, what home might feel like. 4 tables, hundreds of older students, floating candles by the thousand, and, at the front, on a stool that looked too simple for the weight of the moment, the sorting hat. The hat's song began. Harry was not listening particularly. His attention kept returning to the ceiling, to the stars, to the resonance that had not fully faded from his chest since the lake, and so he nearly missed the moment the song's momentum broke. The hat reached its climax and stopped. 3 seconds of silence, not the silence of a pause for breath, but the silence of something that had encountered what it had not expected to encounter, and was processing it. Then the sound changed. The hat was still singing, technically, but the sound filling the great hall no longer came only from a piece of cloth on a stool. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the specific resonance of 1,000-year-old stone, in which the intentions of 4 extraordinary people had been so completely embedded that the stone itself had, over centuries, become something with opinions. But there are those who need no house, no name, whose magic is the castle, and the castle is their flame. The tenancy of houses ends this very fall. The regency of founders has returned to one and all. The hall went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. McGonagall's scroll shifted in her hands. Dumbledore, at the center of the high table, was very still, the stillness of someone paying complete attention. The sorting proceeded alphabetically. It always did. When McGonagall called Granger, Hermione, the girl with the bushy hair, walked forward from the cluster of first years, with the composed determination of someone who had decided that whatever was about to happen, she would face it with her spine straight and her chin level. She sat on the stool. McGonagall lifted the hat. The hat moved, not onto Hermione's head. It leapt, a deliberate motion, precise and intentional, and landed on the stone floor between the stool and the high table, with a sound a cloth object should not have been capable of making. A sound with weight to it. Authority. Then its tip bent toward the floor in Hermione's direction, and did not come back up. The great hall produced a sound that was not quite any one sound. The aggregated noise of 500 people simultaneously having their model of how things worked revised without their consent. Whispers, a few gasps. Someone at the Hufflepuff table dropped a fork. Hermione stood. She looked at the hat on the floor. She looked at McGonagall, whose expression had achieved a quality of controlled blankness, suggesting she was managing a very large internal event with great discipline. Then Hermione straightened her spine, one vertebra at a time, and remained standing beside the stool. She did not return to the cluster of first years. She waited. Harry, standing among them, watched and felt the bell sound intensify. More children were sorted. The hat was retrieved, returned to service, placed on heads, produced its ordinary decisions. Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, the Hall, continued with the particular quality of an audience that has witnessed the first act of something and cannot fully attend to anything else until it knows how the second act begins. Then, McGonagall's voice, controlled, precise, carrying the practiced neutrality of someone delivering a name she had known would arrive and had spent the intervening years deciding how to present, Potter, Harry, the Hall, went electric in the way only a name can make a hall go electric, every person orienting toward the source of it simultaneously. Harry walked forward, aware of the staring. He had been aware of staring for most of his life, though the reasons had differed. On Privet Drive, it was because he was strange, unwanted, inconvenient. This staring had a different quality. They were not looking at him as a problem. They were looking at him as something they had been told about and were now seeing in person. He did not like it. The hat, still on the floor from its bow to Hermione, rose, not with wind, not with any wand directed at it. It rose to roughly 3 feet off the stone, rotating slowly, the way a compass needle orients toward the thing it was built to find. It turned toward Hermione first, then toward Harry, then toward the hall, and the hall, collectively, stopped breathing. Every torch in the great hall changed color at once, the warm orange becoming, simultaneously, blue and gold. The specific blue of deep winter sky and the specific gold of something old being recognized as still existing. Not the colors of any house. Older colors. Colors that predated the tradition. The hat spoke in the voice that came from everywhere. These two are not to be sorted. These two are not to be housed. The castle knows its own. The regency of Hogwarts is restored. Let the founders' inheritors stand in their place. Dumbledore stood, rising with the careful deliberateness of a man who has been the most powerful person in every room he has entered for so long that standing in a room where that is no longer true requires a specific physical acknowledgement. Something moved behind his half-moon spectacles. Not fear, not performed wisdom, but the honest expression of someone encountering the edges of his own knowledge and finding them closer than expected. Snape, to Dumbledore's left, had gone very still. His knuckles around his goblet were the specific white of controlled response. The floor moved. The flagstones of the great hall rearranged themselves with the stately patience of tectonic geography, opening a space between the high table and the house tables where no space had existed before. From that space, from the same gray and gold stone Hogwarts was built of, two thrones rose. Not ornate, not theatrical. Hogwarts stone shaped into high-backed seats that looked as though the hall had always been built around them and had simply, for 1,000 years, been waiting for them to be occupied. On the back of one, a carved lion. On the back of the other, a carved eagle. The thrones had not been assigned. They had been recognized. The Sorting Hat floated between them, turned to face the assembled school, and spoke for the last time that evening, "The regency of Hogwarts Castle is restored." As the castle witnessed, as the founders intended, as the old magic commands. Then it settled back onto its stool, entirely inert, and the blue and gold light held the hall for 10 full seconds before fading. The torches returned to orange. McGonagall's voice, extraordinary in its composure, Moon, Sally, a small girl with red plaits, walked forward, sat on the stool, was sorted into Hufflepuff, and ran to her table. The sorting continued, because ceremonies were what you had when everything changed and the evening still needed finishing. Harry and Hermione walked to their thrones. They had still not spoken to each other. They sat down, looked at the assembled school, Dumbledore standing, Snape with his white knuckles, McGonagall with her magnificent controlled blankness, 500 students whose understanding of the possible had just been permanently revised, and did not look small. They looked certain. Dumbledore sat very slowly, so quietly that only McGonagall could hear Minerva. "What do you know of the Founder's residual clause?" "I was about to ask you the same question, Albus." The Sorting Hat, inert on its stool, gave no further comment. It had been waiting 1,000 years to say what it had said tonight. It could afford to let the humans catch up. The feast ended at 9:10. By then, the other first years had been collected by their prefects and guided through the castle's moving corridors toward dormitories they had not yet learned to find. The Gryffindors followed Percy Weasley's red and gold badge through 3 staircases and a portrait hole. The Ravenclaws climbed a tower. The Hufflepuffs descended toward kitchens that smelled of bread. Harry and Hermione remained in the Great Hall. Not because anyone told them to stay. No one told them anything. The feast had concluded, the students had departed, the teachers had withdrawn to their own council, and in the dispersal, 2 people seated in thrones at the front of the hall simply hadn't been collected. There was no established protocol, no prefect assigned to escort regents, no dormitory waiting. The house elves cleared around them with the practiced invisibility of creatures who had learned to work around whatever the hall contained, human or otherwise. Candles burned down and were replaced without visible intervention. At some point, without discussing it, they both stood. They were talking by then, had been talking since the other first years filed out. The conversation beginning mid-thought, the way conversations do when they should have started much earlier and are compensating for lost time. Hermione had produced the Hogwarts history book and was referencing it as she spoke, conducting a real-time comparison between what the text said and what she had personally experienced, and finding the text inadequate. "It doesn't mention the thrones anywhere," she said. "Not in the founding history, not in the architectural surveys. If this were documented in the standard literature, I'd have found it." "Maybe it wasn't supposed to be documented," Harry said. He was not certain why he said this. He was discovering a general tendency to know things through what he was privately calling the ward touch before he had language for them, to feel the shape of information before he could articulate it. "I think it was removed." "Removed from the records?" "The castle knows it. I can feel it knowing it, like there's a gap where something used to be." In the stone, she closed the book, looked at it, looked at him. "How long have you been able to feel the castle?" "Since the boats." "Since the boats," she repeated, filing it. "Same time as me." "Good. That means it isn't individual, it's the resonance responding to both of us simultaneously, which is consistent with the thesis that the founders designed this as a paired inheritance, not a singular one." She opened the book again, made a notation with a quill produced from some inexhaustible space in her robes, and then stopped walking. They had been walking, Harry realized, his feet following something other than conscious decision, the ward touch providing a navigational awareness that made moving through unfamiliar castle feel less like exploring and more like recalling a building he already knew the bones of. When they stopped, they found themselves on a lower floor than any they'd visited, in a narrower corridor, lit by torches that burned warmer than the ones above. The corridor ended at a wall, no door, no handle, no hinges, no keyhole. Just stone, smooth and faintly warm in a way stone was not usually warm. But in the surface, barely visible and entirely definite, was the outline of a door, not carved, felt, a slight depression that was less a shape in the stone than a held breath. "That's," Hermione began. "Yes," Harry said. She held her hand an inch from the surface, not touching. "The ward touch?" "The most important door in the castle," he said. "It arrived as fact, not deduction, more significant than any other entrance. And it's been waiting." Her hand moved to touch the stone, and the stone moved first. Not swinging, not sliding. It simply changed, the molecules of thousand-year-old rock separating with the patient authority of material, doing what it had always been built for, and had been waiting an extremely long time for the right occasion. The gap widened into an arch. The arch settled into permanence. Beyond it, warm light. The founder's suite was not what Harry had expected, though he couldn't have said what he had expected. Something grander, perhaps. What he found instead felt personal, a central chamber that was neither large nor small stone walls that had absorbed enough firelight over enough centuries to have developed their own warmth. A fire already burning in a hearth to the right. The ceiling hung with the same enchanted starlight as the great hall, but older, different stars, a sky from a different century. 4 corridors led away from the chamber, each with its own quality of light, its own specific pull on attention. From the left, warmth and the smell of something that was neither wood nor metal, the ambient feel of a place accustomed to purposeful effort. From directly ahead, the compressed gravity of an enormous number of books in close proximity, which produced in Hermione a slight forward lean she couldn't quite stop. From the right, the utterly impossible smell of outdoor air, living soil, something green and growing, arriving from a direction that should have contained only castle interior. From the far left corridor, nothing. A door that existed, that Harry could feel through the ward touch as substantial and patient, but sealed, conditionally waiting in a way different from the rest of the suite. He would come back to it. "The study of Gryffindor," Hermione said, pointing left, naming things in order to organize them. "The library of Ravenclaw." She pointed ahead, then stopped herself mid-observation about the volume count visible from the doorway. "The garden of Hufflepuff." She looked at the sealed door. And Slytherin's chamber. Which doesn't open. Not yet, Harry said. The ward touch says it needs something specific, parcel tongue, and a kind of request, not a command. It'll open when I understand enough to ask the right way. Hermione made a note, already half inside the Ravenclaw corridor, exerting visible willpower not to disappear into it immediately. We should establish where we're sleeping first, she said, in the voice of someone being extremely reasonable about something she very badly didn't want to be reasonable about. The 2 bedrooms sat on either side of the central chamber, accessible through low arches. Harry did not look into Hermione's. He had a general sense of it through the ward touch. Cool and precise, lit by something closer to a focused lens than firelight, a space built for sustained intellectual work, and he understood it was not his. His room was fire, not literally, though there was a small lit hearth, but the quality of everything in it was warmth adjacent, a deeper gold in the stone. A window that showed not stars but the Hogwarts grounds at night. The lake, the dark edge of the forest, the landscape he had already decided, 20 minutes earlier on the boat, was the first thing he'd ever seen that looked the way he imagined home might look. He sat on the bed's edge and looked at the window. Across the suite he could hear Hermione's lamp blazing to life and the specific rustle of someone who had already acquired at least one book and was reading it the way she breathed. He looked up at the ceiling's ancient star map. Stars he didn't recognize. Constellations with no names he knew, and touched one. It moved, a slight shift, as if it had been waiting to be touched before it settled, as if the map were still being made. He lay back, thought of a cupboard under a stair in Surrey, felt the ward touch running through the castle around him, every corridor, every new dormitory, every teacher behind every door, and didn't know what to call what he was feeling. Adequate wasn't right. Safe wasn't right. Welcome was closer, but not quite. He fell asleep before he found the word. Dumbledore came that first evening, not aggressively, with his hands in his robes, the careful, curious pace of a man approaching something he didn't fully understand and respected anyway. He walked through the section of corridor that should, by the castle's established geography, have led to the Founder's suite. He walked through it 3 times. The stones were warm, as always in this part of the castle. The torches burned gold, and everything was exactly as it should be, except that the particular stretch of wall where the outline of a door should have been was just wall. Old, warm, unremarkable, the castle was not hostile toward him. There was no alarm, no pressure. The genius loci, with which Dumbledore had maintained a productive relationship for 3 decades, was not refusing him entry the way a ward refuses an intruder. It was, more delicately, simply maintaining a private space, the way a closed door means something even without a lock. He stood for a long moment, feeling the edges of a space he could sense but not reach, and understood something it would take him weeks to fully articulate, that the decade-long plan he had been executing, the one centered on Harry Potter's particular destiny, requiring a particular kind of guidance and a particular kind of loneliness, was no longer the most important plan currently in motion. He was not certain yet whether this was good. Then he decided it was. He returned to his office, opened a thin book bound in faded blue leather from a drawer he never left unlocked, and read for a long time. Then he took a fresh piece of parchment and wrote, in his careful, slightly ornate hand, to the regents of Hogwarts Castle, "I wonder if you might find time, at your convenience, to meet with the headmaster. I have questions, and I suspect you have answers, and I find myself in the rather unusual position of being the one who must request the appointment. At your convenience, as I said. There is no urgency on my end. Yours with considerable interest, Albus Dumbledore." He crossed to the nearest portrait, a former headmaster, pretending, badly, to be asleep. "Kindly find a way to deliver this to the Founder's suite," he said, "when they wake up. There's no rush." The portrait stopped pretending. The Founder's Suite. Albus, I've been in this frame 230 years. It's been empty for every one of them. I know, Dumbledore said. It isn't anymore. He went to bed, and in the morning the most remarkable thing about one of the most powerful wizards of the age, the man who had defeated Grindelwald, the man Voldemort feared, was that he waited for a reply from 2 children before doing anything else. The waiting was not resignation. It was genuine and correct. And somewhere in the castle's ancient awareness, something recognized it as such. The torches in the corridor outside his office burned, briefly, a shade warmer than usual. The Ravenclaw library began responding to Hermione on her second morning. The first morning she had simply read 5 volumes simultaneously, 3 cross-referenced against each other, 17 pages of notes in her smallest handwriting. 11 minutes sitting very still afterward, while her model of the universe absorbed the revision. The books had let her do this. They had behaved, that first night, like ordinary books. On the second morning, everything changed. She opened Ravenclaw's foundational text on magical theory, bound in something that was neither leather nor cloth, and the text on the first page had reorganized itself overnight. Not different content, different arrangement. Skipping the material she'd already absorbed and engaging instead at the level her actual comprehension had reached. She sat very still for a different reason than the night before. On page 47, the reorganized text posed a question in the middle of a declarative paragraph. What is the functional difference between a spell that fails because the caster lacks power and a spell that fails because the caster lacks conviction? She considered it, drawing on the castle's ambient awareness as background data, and wrote 3 paragraphs of response in the margin. The text reorganized again, advancing deeper. She did not come out of the library for 6 hours. Harry's education in the Gryffindor study was less immediately readable as education and more readable as something else entirely. The study was a long room with low ceilings, the ambient quality of a space accustomed to purposeful effort, not abstract thought, but the kind of thinking inseparable from motion. The flagstones at its center were worn smooth in the pattern of feet moving and stopping and moving again, despite 1,000 years of disuse. The practice dummies activated when Harry read. He had been working through a text on the castle's original ward architecture for about 40 minutes when the nearest dummy shifted into the stance the page was currently describing, demonstrating in 3 dimensions what the words conveyed in 2, and the relationship between description and thing clicked into place in a way reading alone hadn't produced. He raised his hand, not his wand hand, just his hand, instinct rather than decision, and the dummy adjusted in response. He felt the ward touch move between them, recognizing that one of its regents was learning something important and providing, with the patient infrastructure of a building that had done this for 1,000 years, the conditions for that learning. He practiced for 4 hours. When Hermione emerged at noon, they found each other in the central chamber in the slightly stunned way of people re-establishing where they actually were after being somewhere very far away. The castle had provided breakfast on a low table without visible mechanism, and they ate standing up, talking across each other. The books respond to comprehension level, Hermione said. Rowena Ravenclaw built an assessment mechanism into the binding itself, probably the same enchantment principle as the Sorting Hat. They know what I know and teach from there. The dummies show me what the texts describe, Harry said. And the castle, I can feel the ward's structure from inside. Not just that it exists, why it works. The founders didn't just build wards, they built a philosophy into the stone that's consistent with the central thesis, Hermione said, notebook already out, that magic operating through pure intent, without wand mediation, is both more powerful and more stable, because it engages the castle's own field rather than the caster's personal reserves. The wand is a focusing tool. The castle is a focusing tool at architectural scale. We're learning to use the larger one. How much of the library have you read? About a quarter of the first volume, she said, with the dissatisfaction of someone who considered a quarter of a first volume an underachievement. There are 43, and that's only what's visible on the first 2 shelves. How many shelves are there? She turned back toward the corridor. I haven't counted yet. That's what I'm going to do now. Classes began on September 2nd and continued with the calendar's indifferent regularity. Harry and Hermione attended everything, a deliberate choice, reached without extended discussion. They understood, without needing to say it to each other, that what they were learning in the suite was not a replacement for the school's curriculum, but a framework that made it more legible. The classes gave them the school's population, and understanding what those students experienced was inseparable from the work of Regency. By the end of the first week, Harry was beginning to distinguish individual magical signatures through the ward touch. Not precisely, but the way you begin to distinguish voices in a room you've sat in long enough. Hermione's was a specific quality of focused intensity, layered and quick. Dumbledore's was vast and very still. Snape's had a particular double-quality surface tension over a managed depth. In herbology, mid-September, Draco Malfoy tripped a small Hufflepuff first year over an extended foot, and then looked, with practiced innocence, at the ceiling. The student was not hurt, only embarrassed and small and standing in soil that had distributed itself across her robes, with the look of someone who had arrived somewhere new hoping it would be different, and was discovering it was not. Harry felt this through the ward touch the way one feels a drop in temperature, not dramatic but real, and requiring a response. That evening, in the suite, Hermione was already composing the letter. Professor Sprout deserves the decision-making authority, she said, without preamble, writing as she spoke. We're not here to manage individual disciplinary incidents. We're here to adjust the conditions that allow them to recur. The castle can monitor his wand use in class, Harry said. If he casts anything unauthorized, the ward absorbs it before it reaches anyone. I've written that in. She reviewed the letter. And paired working arrangements so the social dynamics that make that kind of behavior easy to perform are disrupted. She set down the quill. We don't mention what we know. We make a suggestion she has full authority to implement or not, as she judges appropriate. But the castle backing makes it more than a suggestion. Yes, but she shouldn't feel it as coercion. The suggestion should be good enough to stand on its own merit, and it is. She rolled and sealed it. I'll ask a portrait to deliver it. Professor Sprout implemented its suggestions by the following Tuesday without consulting anyone above her in the administrative hierarchy, and sent back a return note that was warm and practical and carried the dignity of an expert being treated as one. Harry kept the note. He wasn't entirely sure why. It seemed important to keep a record of what it looked like when things worked. It was the 3rd week of September, 11 days into term, when Hermione found the note. She had been reading Ravenclaw's theoretical text for what she estimated was the 14th hour of that particular volume, led through reorganization from foundational theory, through ward construction, through intent amplification mechanics, and into a section she hadn't anticipated, the personal philosophy of the woman who had written it, present not as labeled philosophy, but the way a person is present in everything they make if you read closely enough. Rowena Ravenclaw, as she emerged from the text, was precise, evident in every sentence, the architecture of her arguments as carefully constructed as the building she had helped design. But she was also someone who had thought deeply about purpose, not magic's purpose in the abstract, but the purpose of this place specifically. This experiment in concentrated magical education she had poured herself into alongside 3 other extraordinary people, one of whom she was already, the margins suggested, beginning to disagree with in ways history had never fully captured. The personal notes were in the margins, brief annotations, occasionally a question the text itself then answered in the next paragraph, as though Ravenclaw had known what the reader would wonder. Conversation starters. The book talked, and the margins talked back. On page 237, in the middle of a dense passage about the relationship between a building's magical field and the signatures of the people inhabiting it over time. The main text stopped. In the margin, a different hand, not different pen, not different ink, but different in the specific way handwriting changes when the writer has stopped being a scholar for a moment and is being a person instead. To the one who reads this after me, I knew you would come. I did not know when. I knew you would be wise. This room would not respond to the foolish. I left you everything I could fit in stone. Everything else I left in the castle itself. You do not need to understand what you are to use it. You only need to remember that the castle loves you. It has been waiting. So was I. Hermione read it once. She read it again. She read it 3 more times with the close attention she gave to texts that contained more than their surface presented. Assuming every word was chosen, that the marginal note of someone dead 1,000 years deserved the same rigorous engagement as a living interlocutor. Then she marked the page with the ribbon bookmark and closed the book. She sat very still with the closed book in her lap, amber candlelight moving around her, the castle's presence warm and attentive in the walls. She had been told, across 11 years, many things about what she was. Too much, too many questions, too relentless about being clever, the wrong kind of intelligence to be entirely welcome. Rowena Ravenclaw, one of the 4 most formidable magical theorists in the history of the wizarding world, had written to her across 1,000 years. I knew you would come. The ward touch shifted, a subtle change in ambient awareness, the castle noticing something significant happening in one of its rooms. Harry felt it from the Gryffindor study and walked to the library without consciously deciding to. He found her sitting perfectly upright, an expression he didn't have a precise word for, not crying, the internal weather before crying, present without yet finding its outlet. She showed him the page without speaking. He read it, twice, standing with the book in his hands as the castle did what it did when significant things happened in its rooms. Not flaring torches, but a subtle shift. The air becoming the air of a place where something important was being understood. She knew, he said. She planned for us. 1,000 years ago. Her voice was steady, carrying something enormous. She sat in this room and wrote a note for us. The castle's walls produced a gentle light, not the dramatic blue and gold of the hall's torches, just the warmth a room takes on when a fire has been burning in it long enough that the warmth transfers to the walls themselves. The light of a place that has held care so long the care has become architectural. It was, in its way, putting an arm around them. Harry handed the book back. Hermione held it a moment, set it on the table, and opened her notebook. At the top of a fresh page she wrote, Rowena Ravenclaw designed this library as a conversation. She expected the right reader. She adjusted the text for their comprehension level. She left a personal message. She waited. Then, underneath, so did the castle. So did all of it. We were not accidents. We were anticipated. She closed the notebook. All right, she said, with the decisiveness of someone folding something large into the operational framework of what came next. We have Transfiguration in the morning and I haven't finished the reading, and there are 31 more shelves in this library. We were anticipated, Harry said. 1,000 years ago, someone brilliant and meticulous planned for us. Left us what we'd need. That means something. I know, she said. That's why I wrote it down. She picked up the next volume. Now, go practice. The dummy's been standing there waiting. He went. She read. The castle breathed around them, warm and patient and thoroughly satisfied. In the margin of the second volume's first page, in the same handwriting, good. You're back. Let's continue. The ward touch told Harry about Quirrell on the 3rd day of term. Not in language, the castle did not communicate that way. And Harry was learning to receive its information in the form it actually arrived, which was closer to texture than to words. What the ward touch delivered regarding Quirinus Quirrell was a specific quality of wrongness. Not the wrongness of malice. Quirrell's surface signature was anxious and thin. the magic of a man whose encounter with the thing he studied had reduced rather than expanded him. The wrongness was underneath, a second texture, darker and more coherent, woven through his signature the way a stain moves through cloth, present everywhere, originating from one point of contact. Two presences in one body. Harry described it to Hermione that evening with the imprecision of someone translating between a language he'd just begun and one he was fluent in. She listened with the specific stillness she reserved for information requiring significant theoretical processing, quill resting against her notebook without touching it. "Spirit binding," she said, when he finished. "Is that what it is?" Ravenclaw's texts have a whole section on dark magic taxonomy. It's a method of tethering a non-corporeal consciousness to a living host, one of the oldest known dark practices and one of the most destabilizing, because a host's magical field is never designed to accommodate two intelligences at once. She opened the notebook. "What you're describing, a coherent secondary presence, darker and more intentional than the primary signature, is consistent with the binding's theoretical description. Who would be bound to Quirrell? Voldemort is described in every historical account as possessing an extraordinarily disciplined signature. Cold and precise. Recognizable, Harry was quiet a moment. The castle has been aware of it since he crossed the ward boundary, he said. The ward touch confirmed this as he articulated it, background knowledge he'd been carrying since September 1st without examining it fully. It's been containing the binding, making sure the secondary presence can't access the castle's magic. But Quirrell is still teaching, still in proximity to students. And the Philosopher's Stone arrives in a few weeks, Hermione said, voice very flat. Nicholas Flamel asked for it to be stored here. There's a reference in the administrative archive. The presence in Quirrell would be drawn to it. Then he can't stay. No, she agreed. He can't. They sat with this, two 11-year-olds working through the operational implications of the fact that the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher was hosting the most feared dark wizard of the century. Dumbledore doesn't know, Harry said. Dumbledore suspects something is wrong with Quirrell, Hermione said carefully. The ward touch gives us information his level of castle sensitivity doesn't. He can feel the castle's discomfort, I'm certain of that, but not its specific input the way we can. He knows there's a problem. He doesn't know its precise nature. Should we tell him first? She considered this for precisely as long as it deserved. We act through the castle's authority, which is our own. We tell him simultaneously. He should know what we're doing and why. But we don't ask permission. We don't have time for the administrative conversation, and the Founder's Charter doesn't require us to seek Headmaster approval for a regent determination. That's going to be uncomfortable, she said. Yes, do it anyway. On a Monday in the second week of September, at 12:10, Harry and Hermione stood from their thrones in the Great Hall during lunch. This was not a dramatic gesture. They simply stood, and the standing produced an immediate silence that arrived organically. The way silence arrives in a room when something happens that silence is the correct response to. Forks lowered. Heads turned. Hermione addressed the portrait nearest the high table in the quiet voice of someone who didn't need volume to be heard. Please find Professor Quirrell and let him know he's needed in the Great Hall. The portrait, a 16th-century alchemist who had been painting the same corner of his canvas for 300 years, left his frame immediately. While they waited, neither spoke. The ward touch ran steady and calm through both of them, the castle's vast reserves of accumulated intention oriented toward what was about to happen the way a very large ship orients toward a heading. Minimum drama, maximum inevitability. Dumbledore set down his goblet. Quirrell arrived in the stumbling, apologetic way he moved everywhere, the stammer already visible in his posture. He wore the turban regardless of season or location, which Harry had noted from the first day of defense class, and which the ward touch had told him was not an aesthetic choice. He stopped when he saw the hall. Every face turned toward him. The stammer thickened. The regents, you wanted! "Thank you for coming, Professor Quirrell," Hermione said, precise and entirely without accusation. "The castle has made a determination under the Founders' Charter, Article 12. We need to share it with you and with the school." Quirrell went still. "The castle's ward touch identifies two distinct magical signatures within you, Professor," Harry said, the ward touch running through his voice. "Not magically amplified, but carrying the backing of the castle's awareness behind it. One is your own. The other is not. A second consciousness, bound to you through dark magic, present in this castle since September 1st. The hall's silence acquired a different quality, the silence of a held breath. The stammer vanished. What replaced it was nothing Quirrell normally showed. For 2 seconds, the real man stood stripped of performance, terrified, trapped, possessed. "You can't. Dumbledore doesn't even... How did you?" "The castle's awareness is the determining factor," Hermione said, "not the headmaster's knowledge. The headmaster's knowledge is not relevant to a regent determination. Your appointment as defense against the dark arts teacher is hereby revoked by regent authority," Harry said. "As of this moment, your access to the school's instructional spaces is suspended. The castle will maintain a monitoring ward around you until the spirit binding can be safely addressed by qualified healers. The secondary presence within you will not be able to act through the castle's own magic. But we need you contained and treated." For a moment it was only Quirrell. Then, it was not. The voice that came through him was thin and cold, carrying the specific quality of a consciousness that had been powerful enough to survive its own destruction, and had not forgiven the universe for requiring it, Potter. "This is not over." Harry looked at the turban. The ward touch made very clear what was behind it. Not a face exactly, but a presence of concentrated will. A fragment of human intelligence whittled to its most fundamental elements, operating on spite and ambition and the refusal to accept finality. "Yes, it is," Harry said. Quietly, no theatrical weight. A true statement offered to something that needed to hear it. The castle acted. Quirrell found himself on the other side of the great hall's main doors, which closed with the sound of ancient stone making a decision. A containment net dropped around him on the grounds. He would not leave them. The spirit-binding's secondary presence would find Hogwarts' accumulated old magic considerably more substantial than any force it could currently bring to bear. Dumbledore rose slowly, the careful rising of someone allowing himself to register fully what he had just seen. "I suspected the possession," he said quietly, to no one in particular. "I did not know its nature with sufficient certainty to act definitively. The castle's ward touch evidently resolves that uncertainty." He looked at the sealed doors, then at Harry and Hermione. "The monitoring containment is yours?" "The castle's," Harry said. "We directed it, of course." A pause. "Healers should be summoned from St. Mungo's. I will send the owl this afternoon. The spirit binding will require careful separation. It cannot be forced without risk to Quirrell." "We agree," Hermione said. He looked at her a moment. "I expect we will agree on most things," he said, "and that the occasions on which we do not will be genuinely educational for everyone involved." The ghost of a smile. "I look forward to the meeting you have graciously agreed to schedule." Lunch resumed, not immediately, but after a 10-second period during which 500 people collectively processed what they'd witnessed, and concluded that the new reality was the new reality. Because lunch was what you had after extraordinary things happened, and the castle's own presence, steady and thoroughly unsurprised, made it clear this was not a crisis. This was the system working exactly as designed. At the Gryffindor table, Neville Longbottom, who had dropped his fork, asked the boy beside him, "Did they just expel you-know-who from the Great Hall?" "I think they expelled him from Quirrell, mate," Ron Weasley said. "That's a bit more specific." Neville retrieved his fork. "Right," he said. Right. 3 days after the Quirrell dismissal, Lucius Malfoy arrived at the Hogwarts gates. He came in his finest robes, the winter weight ones, charcoal and silver. The Malfoy crest worked into the lining in a way visible only to people who knew to look for it, which was, of course, the entire point. His cane's serpent head caught the October light. Behind him, a ministry carriage waited on the road with the impatience of expensive things required to wait. He was here for the Board of Governors meeting. He had attended such meetings for 14 years, and the gates had opened for him every time, because his position was conferred by the ministry's Hogwarts charter, and the charter granted access. He placed his hand on the gate. The gate did not move. He used his wand, producing the specific invocation of board membership that had opened it as routinely as a key opens a lock for 14 years. The gate did not move. He looked through the bars at grounds that were entirely normal-looking, the October lawns, the carriageways, the castle catching the late afternoon light in the middle distance. Everything was exactly where it had always been. The gate simply did not open for him. Then the stone pillar to his left, topped by the carved winged boar that had graced the Hogwarts gateposts for as long as the gate had existed, turned its head. Lucius Malfoy was not a man who frightened easily. He had done things in service of a dark lord that were not discussed in polite company. He had sat across negotiating tables from aurors and journalists who wanted to catch him out, and looked at all of them with the comfortable confidence of a man who knew exactly where the floor was, because he had placed it there. A stone pig turning its head to look at him put a specific quality of cold in his chest he would not have described as fear, even under Veritaserum, but which bore certain similarities to it. From the gatehouse wall, a portrait leaned out of its frame, a medieval gatekeeper in faded colors, the kind that exists in castles for centuries before anyone thinks to notice it's there. Lord Malfoy, the portrait said, a communication from the regents of Hogwarts Castle. He produced a scroll and read in the steady voice of someone who had delivered unwelcome news at this gate for 300 years and developed a reliable technique. By regent determination under the Founder's Charter, Lord Lucius Abraxas Malfoy has been issued a sovereign exclusion from Hogwarts grounds on the basis of 1. Confirmed dark magic affiliations as recorded in the Book of Admittance's censure protocol. 2. Documented history of intimidation of Hogwarts staff and students. 3. Active conflict of interest in the governance of a school whose students he has materially harmed. This exclusion is permanent and non-appealable within any ministry court, as the Founder's Magical Trust operates outside ministry jurisdiction. You may correspond with the regents in writing. The gates will not open for you. A pause. Good day. Lucius Malfoy stood with his hand on iron that had not moved for him, looking at the medieval portrait and the stone boar that was still watching him, and the castle in the middle distance, doing nothing visibly dramatic and therefore, somehow, more formidable than anything visible could have been. His voice, when he spoke, was the voice of a man who had not decided what he felt and was producing a preliminary holding position. Tell your children regents, he said, with exquisite, surgical precision, that Lord Malfoy will be consulting his legal team. The portrait nodded with the courtesy of a man who had heard a great many responses and developed the ability to receive them without reaction. Certainly, sir, though I should mention, the regent's legal position is approximately 1,000 years older than yours. A professional pause. Good day. Lucius Malfoy walked back to his carriage. As he went, a large raven that had been occupying the gatehouse roof followed him at a precise 3 feet of altitude, maintaining the distance with the focused attention of something that had been asked to note his departure and was doing so thoroughly. When he turned to look at it, it blinked once, with the quality of a creature not threatening him, but absolutely recording him, and then returned to the roof. In the suite, connected through the ward touch to every gargoyle and carved stone creature in the castle's fabric, Harry and Hermione felt the exchange the way one might feel a window successfully latching in a storm. Small, definitive, the castle, beneath its 1,000-year exterior of patient stone, experienced something for which it had no architectural expression except this. Every torch in the gatehouse corridor burned, very briefly, a shade more gold than usual. The Philosopher's Stone arrived on a Wednesday in November. Harry felt it cross the ward boundary the way one feels a change in atmospheric pressure, not sound, not light, but a shift in the air's quality that the ward touch registered as significant before any conscious assessment could be made. He was mid-exercise in the Gryffindor study, and stilled so completely that the practice dummy paused its own motion in the responsive way it had developed, reading his attention as a signal the session had changed its nature. He placed his hand flat on the wall. The stone's signature moved through the ward touch unlike any other object currently in the castle. Most magical objects had discrete, bounded signatures. The field extended to the object's edges and stopped. The stone did not. Its signature radiated, not aggressively, not like the Quirrell presence, which had the cold intentionality of something that wanted things from the castle. But the way a lamp radiates in a dark room, warmth in all directions, the ambient generosity of something containing more than it was keeping. It was the most extraordinary magical object he had ever been in proximity to. It was also, the ward touch told him almost simultaneously, attracting the wrong kind of attention. The Quirrell presence, contained on the ground since the Great Hall, the spirit-binding's secondary consciousness, unable to act, but not yet safely removed while saint. Mungo's negotiated the complexities of separation, responded to the stone's arrival the way a compass needle responds to a magnet, immediate, directional. Exactly as Hermione had predicted, the fragment of Voldemort's consciousness recognized the stone as the thing it had come to Hogwarts to find. Harry went to find her. She was in the Ravenclaw library, surrounded by open volumes at angles that suggested rapid movement between them. The closer the books sat to each other, Harry had learned to read, the more the subject was interconnecting in her mind. Further apart meant independent threads not yet resolved. The books were very close together. "The stone is here," he said from the doorway. "I know. I felt it 12 minutes ago." She didn't look up. "I've been working through the theoretical implications. Quirrell's secondary presence is responding to it. Yes, expected, but the timeline has compressed. The separation procedure is scheduled for next week. If the presence is now actively oriented toward the stone, that window becomes problematic. We need to move the stone. We need to change its custodian. Changing location doesn't address the fundamental issue. The presence can orient toward the stone's signature regardless of where in the castle it sits. What we need is to change who's holding it. The castle's ward touch is anchored to us. If the stone is in our direct custody, the monitoring ward becomes far more robust. The castle watching both the stone and the presence simultaneously, under our direction, rather than separately, with the stone sitting under the third-floor obstacle course. Harry considered this. Through the ward touch he could feel the third-floor corridor, the locked door, the devil's snare behind it, the sequence of obstacles Dumbledore and various staff had designed with care. They were real and genuinely difficult, and they were also, he now understood, inside the castle's ward boundary. Every room, every corridor was available to the regents through the ward touch. The obstacles were part of the castle. The castle was theirs to direct. "We ask the castle to bring it," he said. "How?" The final protection, the Mirror of Arist, gives the stone to whoever desires to find it but not use it. Dumbledore designed it that way deliberately. She had clearly been thinking about this for the full 12 minutes. The ward touch, directed intentionally through the castle's magical matrix, represents the castle's own desire, and the castle's desire is the stone's protection. It doesn't want to use the stone. It wants to ensure it can't be misused. If we channel that intent through the mirror's enchantment, it should recognize the request as legitimate. Should. Will, she amended. The enchantment's logic is sound. The mirror was built to protect. We're asking it to protect more effectively. It will recognize the alignment. Harry walked to the library wall and placed both hands against the stone. He felt the castle respond, not suddenly, but with the deep, attentive quality of something very large that had been paying attention and was now receiving direction. Bring what is precious and at risk to where it is safest. The ward touch moved through the castle's stone pathways, the same channels cut by the Founder's intention and maintained by every spell cast within the walls for 1,000 years. 32 seconds. The stone arrived in his open hand, smaller than he'd imagined, warm in a way that wasn't the warmth of recent handling, but of something producing warmth for a long time, and seeing no reason to stop. Red, smooth, pulsing faintly against his palm in a rhythm adjacent to a heartbeat. The Quirrell presence will know immediately, Hermione said, already writing. But it can't reach us here, and it can't reach the stone. The monitoring ward holds, and when the healers complete the separation, the presence leaves with the binding's dissolution. What remains is Quirrell, an unwilling host for the better part of a year, who will need significant care. She paused. Whatever fragment of consciousness was bound to him will disperse. Without a body and without the stone, it has nothing to anchor to. As if confirming this, the ward touch registered a surge of fury and desperation from the grounds. The specific quality of a trapped intelligence discovering the thing it had come for was no longer where it had been, and the place it now was entirely inaccessible. Then the voice itself, carried by the castle's acoustic network into every room of the suite and, because the ward touch did not distinguish audiences when something needed hearing, into the great hall. Where breakfast was still in progress, Potter. Potter, give me what is mine. Then silence. In the hall, the paralysis lasted approximately 4 seconds before the Hufflepuff's second years began talking simultaneously, breaking it. Neville Longbottom had gone the color of old parchment. That was him, Ron said quietly. In Quirrell. Since September. The regents knew. They got rid of him, kicked him out of the castle. Out of the building. He's still on the ground somewhere. The castle's got him, Ron said slowly. I think things that weren't normal things are going to be normal things now. McGonagall rose, surveyed the hall with the expression of a woman who understood the difference between a manageable situation and an unmanageable one, was frequently whether someone in authority appeared to know what they were doing, and sat back down. Breakfast resumed. The Mirror of Erised was in the suite by midday, propped against the wall opposite the hearth, its inscription running backward and forward in looping script. Hermione translated it within 30 seconds, as she translated most things. Harry looked into it without intending to see anything in particular, and the reflection changed, not dramatically, the room still the room, but in the center, where he should have stood, there were 2 figures, himself and Hermione. Standing in the great hall, torches blue and gold, the thrones solid behind them, wearing the same ordinary robes they wore now, certain in the bone-deep way that comes from knowing exactly where you are. It was the present moment, not the past, not the future, what he already had, exactly as it currently existed. What he wanted most was not absent. It was not his parents, though the ache of their absence was real and always at the edges of things. It was not safety, though Privet Drive had taught him to understand safety as something withholdable. It was the castle, the light, Hermione beside him, the thrones that meant they were supposed to be here. He heard her come in. "What does it show you?" she asked. "Us, in the great hall, when the torches go blue and gold." He stepped back. "What does it show you?" She looked. "The same thing," she said. "It's showing me the present moment. We're not chasing a dream," she said after a moment. "We're already in it." Dumbledore said the mirror shows people wasting away in front of it, looking at lives they'll never have. We're looking at a life we already have. We should return the mirror to the third floor, she said. It's still worth maintaining as a deterrent, even without the stone behind it. And Nicholas Flamel should hear from us. The Ravenclaw texts raise a real question of whether indefinite preservation through the stone is what he actually wants, or simply the best option he had before a better one existed. You think there's a better option? I think the question deserves to be asked carefully, without presumption. He's 665 years old and has earned the right to decide his own life. But we'll give him more information than he had before. That's what information is for. Harry handed the mirror back to the castle through the ward touch, with the specific intent: return it to where it serves its purpose there. It vanished through the same pathways the stone had arrived by. What remained in the suite was firelight and warmth in the stone, patient in Harry's hand, until the letter to Flamel could be written, and the careful conversation about endings and choices could be had. The chamber had been making itself known since October, not loudly, but as a persistent low note in the castle's awareness, the way a very deep sound is felt in the chest before the ears identify it. Something below, something old. Something the castle's genius Loki was not distressed by, known, part of the foundational architecture, but currently orienting toward the regents with the quality of a thing that had waited for the right people and, after a very long time, had begun to sense they might be here. Hermione had identified it in her reading before Harry raised it, a sealed space beneath the lake level, older than the parts of the castle above it, what Ravenclaw's text called the fourth contribution, which belongs to the one who departed and carries his terms with it. She had been thinking about its requirements, parcel-tongue, non-coercive request, for months. Letting the understanding develop at the pace the sealed door itself seemed to suggest was correct. In February, the ward touch shifted. Harry felt the door's presence change from the patient waiting of something unaddressed to something closer to readiness, held closed now, not by absolute conditions, but by something on the other side that wanted to be asked before it opened. Hermione, he said. She appeared with her notebook. Now? I think so. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her standard position for witnessing things she intended to document, and nodded. Harry stood before Slytherin's door, thinking not of the legacy 1,000 years of history had produced, blood purity, serpent iconography, a creature sealed as a weapon, but of the actual person, a theorist of wards and containment, more politically paranoid than his co-founders, who had expressed that paranoia in architecture. A man who had left in a dispute the history books called Blood and that Hermione's reading suggested was more complicated. Fear, specifically, about what would happen to magical education as the world grew hostile, and whether the answer was to close the door or strengthen the people behind it. He had not been wrong exactly. He had been afraid, which was a different thing. Harry spoke in parcel-tongue, not a command, but the grammatical mood of request he had been practicing since the study's texts first covered it, the structure indicating acknowledgement of the other party's right to decide. I am asking permission to enter what you built. I am not here to command it. I have something to say to the creature you put here, if it is willing to hear me. That is all I am asking. The door opened. What was inside was not what either of them had imagined. The historical record, thin, second-hand, filtered through testimony about events decades earlier, described a cave, a pit, something appropriate to chamber in its most reductive sense. A cage for a dangerous thing. What Slytherin had actually built was more complex. The space opened into stone that had grown rather than been placed, stalactite logic, mineral patient. The pillars lining the central corridor were carved with serpents, but not merely decorated with them. Structural, load-bearing in the literal sense, and a different sense simultaneously. The floor held a shallow layer of water, still but never stagnant. The ceiling caught minimal light and amplified it across the water's surface, making the chamber feel lit when it should, by any reasonable calculation, have been dark. Hermione said, "Oh," then opened her notebook. At the far end, the stone face of Salazar Slytherin looked down from a genuinely imposing height, not decorative, but the imposing of someone who understood scale as communication. The mouth was closed. The eyes were open. From the darkness beneath it, something was aware of them. Harry didn't need the ward touch to feel it. The basilisk's awareness was present, the way weather is present, pervasive. The ambient consciousness of something very large that had been alive a very long time in a very enclosed space. Not threatening, exactly, the awareness of something enormously powerful that hadn't been given a reason to trust anything in a very long time. He waited, did not approach further. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," he said in Parseltongue. "I'm going to tell you why I'm here, and then you can decide. You've been here 1,000 years, alone, sealed. You were put here with instructions and no one asked if you agreed to them. You were told to serve whoever could claim the right lineage, and you've done that because you were bound to, not because you chose to." The water moved, a gentle displacement, the ripple of something very large shifting its weight. "I can feel you through the ward touch," Harry said. "The castle knows you. You're part of its foundation magic. You've been part of it since Slytherin built this space, which means part of what this castle is has always included you, not as a weapon to be stored, as a constituent." He paused. "What I'm asking is whether you'd be willing to be part of it differently. Not as a prisoner, waiting to be deployed. As a guardian, here because you chose it, answering to the castle's purpose rather than an inheritance claim." The darkness moved. The basilisk emerged slowly, 60 feet of ancient predatory life, moving with the lateral grace of a creature evolved exactly for this architecture, scales the color of deep water in the absence of light. Its eyes were closed. Not trained behavior, Harry understood through the ward touch that this was the basilisk's own choice, made before it emerged, the first part of its answer. It stopped 15 feet from Harry, head lowering until its jaw rested a foot above the water, making itself accessible rather than dominant. Harry placed his hand carefully on its snout. The ward touch ran between them for 3 seconds. The basilisk opened its eyes once, not at the room, at Harry specifically, calibrated and controlled. Communication, not weapon. What Harry received was not language. It was the quality of something asked for its consent for the first time in 600 years, needing a moment to register the experience fully. Then the eyes closed again, the head lifting very slightly, a creature settling into a different posture, having made a decision. "Yes, I accept. Thank you for asking." "You're welcome," Harry said. That same autumn, a first-year named Ginny Weasley had arrived at Hogwarts, carrying an old diary she had found among her school supplies, and had been writing in for weeks. The ward touch flagged the secondary presence attached to it on her second day, small but coherent, a spirit anchor. Hermione recognized from her reading following the Quirrell incident a preserved fragment of consciousness, constructed through dark magic into a semi-stable form, inert until activated by a willing hand and patient enough not to mind the waiting. Hermione asked her to tea. The conversation was careful, conducted with the courtesy Hermione applied to situations where someone was carrying something they didn't know they were carrying, explaining what she could, omitting what would be unnecessarily frightening, and asking, very simply, whether Ginny would let the regents look at the diary. Ginny handed it over with the visible relief of someone who had been uncomfortable about something for weeks without knowing why. The diary went into a lead-lined case the castle furnished when Hermione mentioned the requirement. Lead because the spirit anchor was designed to leech onto whoever held it, and lead disrupted the leeching without destroying the evidence. In the chamber, with the basilisk coiled at the far end in its new capacity as guardian rather than prisoner, Hermione opened the case. The diary was ordinary-looking, black leather. The name T.M. Riddle printed on the first page in ink the case's containment hadn't disrupted, because the anchor wasn't in the ink, but in the object's magical structure. A spirit anchor isn't a living consciousness, she said, notebook open, documenting the procedure as she designed it. It's a preserved fragment, constructed through dark magic into a semi-stable form, the essential nature of something living, existing in an object rather than a body. Basilisk venom is lethal to living tissue because it overwhelms a body's own magic completely. A dark construct built to mimic living magic, in order to interact with a living mind, should be vulnerable to the same mechanism. Theoretically, Harry said. The Ravenclaw Library has more material on spirit magic theory than anywhere else in Britain. I'm confident. Harry asked the basilisk through the ward touch's grammar of request whether it was willing to provide venom for the purpose, not against a person, against a dark object. The basilisk's head lowered toward a fang in the same settling motion as before. Something adjacent to purpose coming through the ward touch, the particular quality of a creature given a task it had chosen to perform. Hermione drew a single drop onto the diary's spine with careful precision, the castle's own protective ward around her hands. The diary's dark presence, a small, cold, intentional signature the ward touch had been registering as a malevolent hum, attempting to reach toward the nearest available consciousness now that it was exposed, simply stopped, not fading but ending, the way a sound stops not by trailing off, but by ceasing. The pages went still in a way, pages that had only ever been paper had no other reason to describe as still. What remained was a notebook. Ordinary paper. Blank pages. The name on the first leaf, slightly faded but intact. The record of ownership, which had survived because it was ink, not magic. And ink is just ink. Hermione wrote a single line, spirit anchor dissolved. Method confirmed. Basilisk venom effective against non-living dark magic constructs. Object inert. Thank you, Harry said in Parseltongue. The basilisk's presence in the castle's awareness had changed, no longer the low, patient note of something sealed and waiting, but the specific presence of something with a place. A purpose that wasn't imprisonment. A function it had accepted rather than been bound to. When they emerged that evening, the sealed door of the suite stood open for the first time. Slytherin's personal library was not large. 3 shelves, perhaps 40 volumes, the collection of a man who selected carefully rather than accumulated broadly, ward theory, Parseltongue linguistics, the magical theory of creature consciousness, and what it meant for a non-human mind to consent to a magical compact. On the shelf's end, a single framed piece of parchment, not warded, just preserved. 4 lines in an angular, precise hand. I built the door because I was afraid. I built the creature because I wanted the school to be safe when I was gone. I made them both too conditional. If you are here, you found a better way to ask. I am sorry the creature waited so long. Hermione read it 3 times. Harry felt, through the ward touch, the faint echo of Slytherin's presence in the castle's stone, the same kind of preserved trace Ravenclaw had left in the library. Not grief exactly. Closer to the satisfaction a question has when it's finally answered correctly. Permission, Harry had thought when the basilisk surrendered its gaze. Permission, he thought now, reading 4 lines of apology from someone dead 1,000 years who had known he owed it. We should write to Ginny, Hermione said, closing her notebook. Let her know the diary was addressed and she's all right. She's been watching us in the corridors all week, waiting to ask. Tomorrow morning. Scabbers had been anomalous since September of that same second year. Harry had flagged the irregularity in his mental catalogue early in term and deferred it, because the first weeks had contained Quirrell and the Stone and Lucius Malfoy, and the foundational work of understanding what they were and what the castle needed from them, and a rat with an unusual signature had, in that context, been a manageable deferral. By October the deferral had run its course. The ward touch registered Scabbers differently from the castle's other animal inhabitants, not an animal signature, but a compressed human one. The specific quality of a person who had made himself as small as possible and maintained that compression so long, the maintenance itself had become the primary thing the signature expressed. Like a person who had been holding his breath for years. The signature matched nothing in the current population but the castle's deep archive, running back through every student who had ever entered Hogwarts, recognized it. A former student, Gryffindor, Peter Pettigrew, who was supposed to be dead. Hermione confirmed it that November using the word truth, not legilimency, not mind reading, but the castle's ambient awareness of the dissonance between what a living thing's magic expressed and what its surface presented. The return, suppressed animagus transformation. Human, registered name Peter Pettigrew. Status, deceased. She sat with this a long moment. He's been living in Ron Weasley's pocket, Harry said. In the Weasley family for years before that. The transformation isn't recent. The signature indicates the compression has been sustained for over a decade. She was writing rapidly. Which means he faked his death in 1981 and has been hiding as an animal since. Why would someone fake their death in 1981? Because something happened that made being thought dead considerably safer than being known alive. If you'd done something significant for him, and the alternative to being thought dead was being known as the person who did it, then you'd stay dead, Harry said. They looked at each other. Sirius Black, Hermione said. He's been in Azkaban since 1981, Harry said. 11 years now. For the Muggle deaths and Pettigrew's supposed death. For betraying. He stopped. He's been in Azkaban 11 years for something Pettigrew did. The word truth, Harry said. If Pettigrew speaks within the boundary, he can't lie, she said. And it's witnessed, the Book of Admittance records what the word truth registers, in ink that cannot be altered, forged, or denied. That's the exoneration, Harry said. That's the exoneration, she agreed. The castle prevented Pettigrew's transformation with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything the genius Lochi did under Regent direction. Scabbers, tucked into Ron's robes during a Tuesday Charms class, attempted his customary small rodent routine of sleeping through lessons, and found that the familiar contraction of animagus transformation, performed so many times across 13 years it had become as instinctive as breathing, simply would not complete. The castle absorbed the attempt the way it absorbed unauthorized spells, cleanly, leaving him with nothing but the awareness that the thing he had tried to do had not happened. He tried again. The castle held steady. He tried a third time and understood. The way hunted things understand things before they understand anything else, through the body, that the building itself was not going to let him change. He was human-shaped and cornered in the corridor outside the Charms classroom, when Harry and Hermione came around the corner from the direction of the Founder's suite, a direction no student had access to. Which confirmed, if confirmation were needed, that the encounter was not coincidental. Pettigrew was small and balding and missing a finger on his right hand, with the specific quality of a man who had been afraid continuously for 13 years and had aged into the fear the way one ages into chronic pain, not dramatically, but with the posture of someone who had reorganized his entire physical self around managing it. He looked at them and knew. Whatever the word truth did to the ambient awareness around a person attempting a false surface, he could feel it, not as pain, but as the experience of the thing he was doing not working while the thing he actually was became very legible to the room. "We're not here to harm you," Hermione said first, before anything else, and meant it precisely, because the word truth would have registered untruth otherwise. "We need you to tell the truth. The castle will record it. That's all." Pettigrew's eyes moved between them, calculating in the way of someone who has survived by reading available exits and finding none. "I don't know what you think the word truth is active," Harry said. Not threatening. Informational. You can feel it. I know you can. A pause. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Harry said. starting with October 31st, 1981, starting with the Potters. The word truth ran through the castle's awareness as he spoke. Peter Pettigrew talked in the corridor for 17 minutes. James and Lily Potter, the decision to switch secret keepers at the last moment. The thing he had chosen instead of loyalty. The street in Muggle London. The explosion he had cast himself. The finger he had severed to leave evidence. The rat form and the drain, and the years since. He spoke with the quality of someone who has held an enormous weight for so long that when the holding ends, what arrives is not relief, but the collapse that comes after relief. The body's honest accounting of what the holding cost. The Book of Admittance, in its tower, wrote every word, every confession, in ink no obliviation or political pressure could alter. When he finished, he was sitting on the corridor floor. His legs had made the decision independently. Harry crouched, staying out of arm's reach, which the ward touch told him was the appropriate distance. You're going to be held in the castle's containment ward until we can arrange a formal trial. You'll be safe. The castle's monitoring ward is not Azkaban. You won't be harmed. And then a man who has spent 11 years in Azkaban for what you did is going to be freed. Harry looked at him steadily. Whatever the Wizengamot decides about you is not our determination to make. What we've done is give them the truth. The actual truth, witnessed by the castle. They can't ignore it. The containment was clean and quiet, and Pettigrew was inside it before the charms class released its students to the corridor. The sovereign decree took Hermione 3 days to draft, not because the legal argument was complex, but because she was drafting a document requiring a ministry that had imprisoned a man for 11 years to formally acknowledge its error, with no available gap for procedural delay. She worked from the Ravenclaw texts on pre-ministry legal instruments and Slytherin's library on trust decrees, producing 18 pages citing every relevant Founder's magical trust provision in sequence, including a full transcript of Pettigrew's ward truth testimony as recorded in the Book of Admittance. The decree's central instrument, a formal trust-level declaration that the book's evidence constituted grounds for mandatory Wizengamot action within 30 days. Mandatory because the Founder's magical trust was a legal authority older than the Ministry's own founding charter, and a trust-level declaration in an evidentiary matter created an obligation the Ministry could not decline without, entering a constitutional argument about pre-Ministry magical law that it could not win. Dumbledore reviewed it at the Regent's request, their first formal meeting with him that year, reading all 18 pages with the focused attention of a man who had spent decades developing both the skill and the patience for dense legal documents. "This will work," he said, setting it down. "The Ministry will resist, not the substance. The transcript is exactly the kind of record they cannot argue with. They will resist the procedure. They will find the 30-day obligation uncomfortable." "It's non-negotiable," Hermione said. "We could have extended it. We chose not to." "No," he said. "I don't suppose you would extend it." He looked at the decree. "I will submit this with my own letter confirming the evidentiary validity. It will help to have the Headmaster's endorsement alongside the trust decree." "We'd appreciate that," Harry said. "I rather think you don't need it," Dumbledore said, "but I offer it in the spirit of cooperation, which I understand is the framework we are working within." "It is," Harry said. Dumbledore held the decree a moment with the care of someone who understood what a correctly built document meant. "Sirius will be," he paused, found the word. "Overwhelmed, we know," Harry said. "We've arranged for the meeting to happen here, in the Founder's suite, when he's ready, not before." "Here," Dumbledore repeated, looking around the central chamber, "the firelight, the corridors." The warmth of a space closed for 1,000 years and now open, lived in, inhabited by purpose. Yes, this seems the right place for it. Sirius Black was released 16 days after the decree's submission, 14 days faster than the window required, the specific motivational effect of a document, making the cost of delay absolutely clear to every member of the chamber. Pettigrew was formally charged. The trial was set. The record was complete. He came through the suite's entrance on a Thursday afternoon, thin in the way 11 years of Azkaban makes a person thin, not just the body, but the quality of someone who had existed at the bare minimum of existence for so long that the return to full existence required active recalibration. He moved carefully, still distinguishing a space that was safe from one that merely appeared so. The two having been the same thing for so long, the distinction took effort. He looked at the suite for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at Harry. Harry had understood intellectually what this moment would contain. A godfather who'd spent 11 years in Azkaban for a crime he didn't commit, meeting a godson who hadn't known his godfather existed. He had not prepared for the face, not the thinness, not the specific damage Dementors do to the architecture of a face, but James Potter and Lily Potter both present in Sirius Black's expression at once. The way grief and love and something in the space between them moved across features that had known them both better than almost anyone alive. Sirius sat down by the fire. Prongs would have lost his mind at this, he said, in a voice rougher than it would have been and steadier than it had any right to be. Absolutely lost it. He would have been insufferable, in the best possible way. "Tell me about him," Harry said. "Tell me about both of them." Hermione appeared in the library doorway, read the room, the fire, the two chairs, the texture of what was happening between them, and quietly didn't enter. "The castle will make tea," she said to the corridor. 2 cups appeared on the table, warm and immediate and without ceremony. Sirius looked at them, something crossing his face that was not quite a laugh and was more complete than one. He began to talk. The Marauder's map, 3 floors above in a drawer where Filch had stored it years earlier, began to glow steadily for the full 2 hours Sirius sat by the fire and told Harry Potter about his parents. While the castle, which had known James Potter and Lily Evans as students, and had stored their signatures in its deep archive the way it stored everyone who had ever mattered to it, listened along. Cornelius Fudge arrived at Hogwarts on a Wednesday in October of the Regent's 3rd year, without advance notice, a deliberate choice, intended to arrive as the Ministry of Magic, which did not require appointments. He brought 2 Aurors, a legal advisor, and a 12-page document, 3 months in preparation by 6 lawyers, drafted to be unassailable. The gates opened for him, which surprised him slightly. He had half expected Malfoy's treatment and had a response rehearsed for it. He was led by the castle itself to the entrance hall, where a portrait told him the regents would receive him in 40 minutes. The 40 minutes was not discourtesy. Hermione had calculated it precisely. Long enough to let him experience waiting in a space the castle controlled, short enough to avoid actual rudeness. Communicating you will wait at our timing, not yours without stating it directly. When he finally entered the suite, the room resisted his reading of it. It was not theatrical, it was intimate, suffused with the warmth of a space seriously inhabited. The table carrying the organization of ongoing work rather than anything staged for him. Harry and Hermione did not stand. Fudge noted this with the automatic political reflexes of someone who had spent his career tracking the physics of deference. They were not being rude. They simply weren't conducting this meeting in a register where standing carried significance. And the actual ease of it was more disorienting than a performed version would have been. The Ministry's administrative authority over Hogwarts is established under the Educational Standards Act of 1926, he said, placing his document between them. This document is a formal restatement of that authority. We've read the Educational Standards Act, Hermione said. I would expect nothing less. The 1926 Act establishes the Ministry's authority to inspect and advise institutions operating within the Ministry's charter jurisdiction. Hogwarts does not operate within that jurisdiction. Hogwarts operates within the Founders' Magical Trust, which predates the Ministry's founding by approximately 930 years. His smile remained. The Founders Magical Trust has not been an active legal entity since the day before we invoked it, Harry said. The trust's legal status isn't contingent on activity, Hermione said. A trust established under old magic law doesn't expire through dormancy. It remains operative until dissolved by the parties with authority to dissolve it, which under its founding terms is the founders or their designated successors. We have not dissolved it. It is therefore operative. My legal team has reviewed the trust documentation. We know. They requested copies from the Book of Admittance last month. It records all requests for access to its holdings. She produced the access record. Their review took 16 working days. Their conclusion, which the book also recorded as testimony provided to your own team during that review, the documentation is authentic, pre-ministry, and constitutionally prior to your founding charter. Fudge looked at the record. Your own lawyers told you we were right, Harry said, not unkindly, as a fact. He was quiet for a moment. He was not a stupid man, cautious, politically adept, having survived 5 years as minister by understanding that institutional power was partly a function of confidence. He had understood, arriving, that he faced something unusual. He had not fully understood, until now, that he faced something that had already finished the legal work he'd brought as leverage. What is it that you want from this meeting? He asked finally. The same thing we wanted when we filed the Sovereignty Declaration 2 years ago, Hermione said. The ministry's relationship with Hogwarts is administrative, not constitutional. You advise, you provide services. You do not govern, appoint staff, alter curriculum, or send officials to conduct inquiries without regent approval. That is significantly outside the current arrangement. The current arrangement is significantly outside the trust's terms, Harry said, which makes the ministry the one operating outside its authority, not us. Fudge looked at his own 12 pages with the expression of a man who has brought a very good answer to the wrong question. If I were to formally challenge the trust's legal precedents, he said slowly, the Wizengamot would need to rule that a magical compact established under old magic law, recognized by the castle's own genius loci, and confirmed authentic by your own legal review, does not supersede a 1926 act of your own parliament, Hermione said. You're welcome to make that argument. Gringotts operates under a comparable pre-ministry goblin banking charter. If old magic law is subordinate to ministry statute, the same logic would apply there. The expression that crossed Fudge's face at Gringotts was that of a man considering, for the first time, an implication his preparation had entirely missed. I see, he said. The Sovereignty Declaration already addresses the relationship clearly, Harry said. We're not asking the ministry to diminish itself. We're asking for accuracy. The word truth, running through the castle's ambient awareness, registered something Harry hadn't expected. Not strategizing, but genuine processing. A man beginning to understand, for the first time, that the institution he was defending had grown to occupy space that didn't belong to it, and the occupation had only seemed normal because no one had been positioned to notice. Fudge picked up the Sovereignty Declaration, reading this time for understanding rather than vulnerabilities. I will take this back to the ministry, he said eventually. There will need to be a formal Wizengamot session. The Board of Governors' dissolution, the Founders' Council has already been constituted, Hermione said. Experienced educators, no active political affiliations, all appointments approved by the Headmaster. First session next month. And the curriculum matters are the Headmaster's domain, where we've concurred with one exception we teach ourselves. He stood, eventually holding his unsubmitted document. You are, he said, with the care of someone choosing words with full awareness of what they were, extraordinarily well prepared. We've had 3 years, Harry said. And a very good library. He placed the document back in his briefcase. I expect we will be having a great many more conversations. We hope so, Hermione said. We'd like it to be accurate and functional rather than contested. At the suite's entrance, he paused. the Aurors outside. They walked in circles for 40 minutes before finding this corridor. The castle was helping them, Harry said. They were in no danger. I'll tell them that. A beat. I'm not certain it will help. In the corridor, his legal advisor, having spent the same 40 minutes with two confused Aurors, handed him a preliminary memo recommending the Ministry seriously consider whether the Founders' Magical Trust constituted a precedent its existing legal framework couldn't accommodate. He read the first paragraph in silence and said nothing. At the gate, the iron between the two halves briefly formed, distinctly, the shape of an H. A portrait on the gatehouse wall had seen this happen many times since the gates developed the habit, and found it funnier each time. The Tri-Wizard Tournament announcement arrived in September of the Regent's 4th year, the IKW delegation's signatures registering at the outer ward boundary before the Owls carrying formal correspondence had cleared the grounds. Among them, a senior coordinator named Theodora Vane, managing international wizarding relations for 31 years, whose signature the ward touch read as genuinely formidable, and whose judgment on entering the suite was reserved rather than performed. "You've read the tournament charter," she said, before anyone else spoke. "The original 14th century founding documents, in the Ravenclaw library, and the 1792 revisions, accessed through the Book of Admittance," Hermione said. "Then you know what we're asking. The Ministry's authority to bind Hogwarts to hosting arrangements is, we've recently been advised, not as clear as previously assumed." She said this without inflection. "We are here to negotiate with the actual relevant parties." "We have conditions," Hermione said. "Of course you do. State them." The conditions took 40 minutes to present, and 2 further hours to settle an implementation language. The first, enforcing the age restriction through the castle's wards rather than a drawn line, drew the most resistance from the accompanying officials. Vane overruled them with the patience of 3 decades' practice. The Regent's wards cannot be bypassed by confundus charms or aging potions. If the restriction is genuine, the castle's enforcement achieves the goal completely. If it's performative, she left this unfinished. The second condition, releasing from the binding anyone entered without consent, took longer. Since the ICW had never encountered a hosting institution claiming authority to modify the goblet's terms. Hermione presented the mechanism plainly. The goblet operated within the castle's ward boundary, and the genius Loki, directed by the regents, could specify the conditions under which any object's enchantment applied there. "The goblet selects the most worthy competitor," she said. "It exists to prevent withdrawal after selection, not to compel participation by people who never consented to be selected. We're clarifying the application, not altering the enchantment." "How old are you?" Vane asked. 14. "My junior legal coordinator has practiced magical contract law for 11 years. He is somewhat less precise than you are. The Ravenclaw library has original 13th century texts on magical contract theory," Hermione said. "I've simply read them." The conditions were accepted. The implementation language drafted in Hermione's own clean hand directly into the formal agreement, the Book of Admittance providing its witness seal as Hermione held the document to the wall. "I have not previously seen the Book of Admittance used as a notary," Vane said, watching the seal settle. "We use the resources that are available," Harry said. Beauxbatons arrived in October, composed and confident, and the students' presentation experienced a slight disruption when they entered the Great Hall to find 2 14-year-olds on thrones, rather than the only thrones being the high table's chairs. Madame Maxime, briefed in advance, recovered first and inclined her head. The assessment of a very experienced person encountering something that exceeded her prior model, updating the model accordingly. Durmstrang's ship arrived 3 days later. The ward truth hit Igor Karkaroff before he crossed the threshold, not a spirit binding like Quirrell's, but a concealed affiliation, old and deliberate, the magical equivalent of a mark covered for years. Harry said nothing during the arrival, but flagged it to Hermione through their compressed ward touch shorthand, a texture, a directional signal, this one. Watch. The goblet of fire was installed on the 1st of November. Harry spent 10 minutes alone with it before its installation was announced, understanding rather than modifying its enchantment, which selected not simply for skill, but for the alignment between a person's genuine intent and capability, a simpler version of the same principle governing the Sorting Hat. At 11:43 that evening, the ward modification registered an approach to the goblet from the direction of the staff corridor where Mad-Eye Moody had taken residence since September, a signature carrying the same double quality Harry had noted in Karkaroff, but deeper, more recently constructed. Polyjuice, the ward touch told him, someone who was not Alistair Moody, inside Moody's magical approximation. "We should be thorough before we act," Hermione said when he told her. "I want to know where the real Moody is before we expose the imposter. Otherwise, whoever's wearing his face has time to act." The deep archive held Moody's authentic signature from his student years, distinctive and strong. The current arrival's was a very good approximation, not the original. The real Moody was not in the castle, which meant outside the ward boundary entirely, which meant Polyjuice required a continuous source kept somewhere reachable. His trunk, Hermione said. In his own room. The ward touch found him there, warded with genuine expertise, frightened and depleted but alive. Barty Crouch Jr. was arrested the following morning without confrontation. The castle simply sealed his access to every room but the one he occupied while Harry and Hermione gave Dumbledore the evidence, and the Aurors, summoned by Patronus, were directed precisely to him. The tournament proceeded on the agreed terms. 3 days before the third task, the ward touch found a departure enchantment Crouch had embedded in the Triwizard Cup's base, routing whoever touched it to a location outside the castle's knowledge. Harry absorbed the portkey enchantment with both hands flat against the trophy room wall on a Tuesday evening, and the cup became simply a cup. Cedric Diggory reached it first in the maze, genuinely first, through the excellence of a 17-year-old who had trained hard, navigated well, and deserved to win, and raised it above his head in the empty center of the maze, alone for 3 seconds, before the cheering reached him as a wall of sound. In the suite, hearing it through the castle's acoustic register, Hermione wrote, "Third task concluded. No incidents. Tournament complete." She underlined the last 2 words. "Cedric lives," Harry said. It was not a dramatic statement. It was a fact, and the fact was the point. Voldemort returned that July. The ward touch told Harry at 4 in the morning, not through internal awareness, which reached the ward boundary and stopped, but through the quality of absence registering just outside its range. A magical event of considerable scale, magnitude without detail, the way one feels a distant concussion without hearing it. He found Hermione in the Ravenclaw library at 4:15, already there since 3:40. "The resurrection ritual requires bone, flesh, and blood," she said, without looking up. "The blood of an enemy gives the returned form a specific immunity. He didn't have Harry's blood. I know. Which means the return succeeded. The ritual only requires the 3 elements, not specifically Harry's blood, but the particular immunity his original return was designed to provide is absent. He's weaker than he would have been." She closed the text. "He no longer has the Horcrux anchors. We've addressed them, one by one, across the past year. He's mortal, resurrected, and without the advantage his return was supposed to give him. He's also a strategist, and he understands that he has a narrowing window before the people who'd stop him organize. He'll come here. Yes, because this is where we are, and because taking Hogwarts is the demonstration he needs that no institution can resist him. Because Hogwarts, under our authority, is the center of gravity for the British wizarding world right now. If he breaks this, he breaks the resistance before it can organize. He can't break this." "No," Hermione said, "but we should let him try, because the demonstration matters as much as the fact." The Death Eaters came on a Tuesday evening in October, under a sky deliberately obscured, the specific signature of dark magic applied to weather, not natural cloud cover. Harry felt them at the outer boundary at 9:47, roughly 30 signatures, organized, the pattern of people who had done coordinated approaches before. "We go out," Hermione said. "Not a question. We take the castle with us," Harry said. "I've been practicing the projection for 2 years. The castle's been helping." The Ward Stone Effect's mobile projection carried not just a shield, but the castle's intelligence, including the grounds, which had been responding to Regent direction for 4 years. The Death Eater's approach formation encountered terrain that quietly, by degrees, refused to lead where it appeared to. 4 of the 30 signatures separated within 3 minutes, turned back toward the boundary. The basilisk met 4 more at the lake's edge, eyes closed, scale alone the only argument required. 22 continued. Harry and Hermione walked through the main entrance at 9:58, 14 years old, school robes. A faint gold corona, the only visible sign of anything unusual. The casting was continuous and organized, trained people rotating through coordinated combinations. Every curse reached the Ward Stone Effect and stopped, not deflected, absorbed. The castle converting force into the ambient warmth every visitor felt and attributed to character without understanding what it actually was. A sustained, synchronized curse designed to punch through a layered ward found no seams to exploit. Because the Ward Stone was not layered. It was the castle's foundational old magic. Lily Potter's sacrifice resonance amplified 100-fold by the Founder's combined intentional architecture, the most substantial magical structure in British wizarding history. Harry raised his hands, no wand, and reached into the castle's vast reserve, directing it outward through the unmake magic the Ravenclaw Library's deepest theoretical section had contained. Not destructive, but the specific application of the Founder's combined essence to the dark constructions, allowing a fractured soul to persist past every natural ending. The locket, the cup, the diadem, the ring, addressed one by one across the previous year. Only Nagini, with Voldemort, remained. The unmake magic reached outward through the projection, through the ground, toward the resonance connecting the remaining anchor to the soul it was maintaining. 7 seconds. The resonance snapped, not violently, the sound of a taut string going suddenly slack. In the grounds of Malfoy Manor, Nagini simply died. Old enough that the removal of the dark maintenance, sustaining her past her natural lifespan, left her body, with nothing to run on. Every dark mark on the grounds flared and went dark simultaneously. Several Death Eaters sat down where they stood. "The castle's monitoring ward will cover anyone who remains," Hermione said, no louder than usual. "The Aurors have been summoned. They'll arrive within the hour." She looked at what had been the formation. "You don't have to stay, but if you leave without protection. Into a world where he's mortal and without anchors, and the Ministry has outstanding warrants. The monitoring ward is safer than whatever is outside it right now." 12 of the 22 stayed. 10 dispersed into the dark. Harry forwarded their departing signatures through the ward touch to the arriving Auror's Patronus network. At 11:20, Voldemort arrived alone, not the army-managing strategist Harry had expected, but a single figure at the boundary, the ward touch registering something diminished, not in power exactly, but in the specific dimension the soul anchors had provided, the accumulated weight of a magical architecture that had sustained him for decades and was now entirely gone. Powerful still, brilliant still, mortal, for the first time since his first death, fully and completely. Harry walked to meet him. Hermione stayed at the projection point, maintaining the connection. In Voldemort's red eyes through the Ward Truth's ambient extension to the boundary's edge, Harry read something clear and complicated: fear. Not of Harry specifically, but of what he represented. A system without precedent in 50 years of strategic experience. Tom, Harry said. The name landed the way it always landed, not to diminish him, but to name the thing underneath the architecture. I've ended the Horcruxes. Nagini is gone. What remains is you. The curse that followed. Green. The green that had given Harry his scar and killed his parents reached the ward stone and stopped. So did the second. For a moment the figure at the boundary went very still. Harry reached into the deepest extension of the foundational old magic and directed it outward. Not destruction, the unmaking of constructions that had let a will refuse every natural ending. Tom Riddle was 68 years old. He had died once and refused the dying. Fractured his soul and rebuilt himself from the fragments, spent 50 years becoming something that could not be killed in ordinary ways. He had not, in those 50 years, faced the specific combination of a living castle's old magic, directed by its recognized regents, amplified by a sacrifice protection that had been part of its foundational resonance for 14 years. What the ward truth registered in the final moments, which Harry kept private afterward, was something letting go. Not force overwhelming force, but a man who had held to life with the fury of someone who believed death the worst thing available, discovering at last what was on the other side of holding on. Tom Riddle collapsed in the field outside the boundary. The dark marks on every arm in Britain went out simultaneously, not in sequence, but all at once, the magical equivalent of every lamp going dark when the source is gone. Harry walked back through the ward boundary. Hermione looked up from her notebook, the long look, not assessment or documentation, just presence. "It's done," he said. "The Aurors will arrive in 12 minutes, she said. 12 in custody, evidence preserved through the book's witness record. She looked at the quiet grounds. There will be a great deal to do tomorrow. Yes, tonight though, tonight, he agreed. The torches in the castle's windows burned orange, and then, for 10 full seconds, without direction, without request, of the castle's own choice, blue and gold. Then orange again. The Aurors arrived at 11:32. The morning after was administrative. Hermione had been working since 5, prisoner custody documentation for the 12 Death Eaters in the castle's monitoring ward, evidence submissions for the 10 who had fled, formal notification to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, confirmation to the ICW that the threat present in British magical life for 2 decades had been addressed and Hogwarts' sovereign status remained intact. Dumbledore came at 7, looked at the documentation, then at Harry, then at the documentation again. The Ministry will want to be involved in the trials. We've drafted the transfer protocol, Harry said. Custody handover at noon, the book's witness record attached to each file. The evidence cannot be challenged. Some of them will attempt to claim imperious. The ward truth records distinguish compelled action from chosen action, Hermione said. The files will show which is which. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Last night you conducted what was effectively the final battle of a war that has been running since before you were born, he said. You are 14 years old. We had the castle, Harry said. The castle had you, Dumbledore said. Those are different things. Both true, but different. The reform work began in earnest the following year. Hermione's analysis of the house system, 17 pages, 3 weeks in the making, concluded the houses had drifted from their original purpose, and the drift had been damaging. The fix was not abolition, but redirection. Stop treating houses as competing factions, and start recognizing achievement individually, by name, in the castle's permanent record, rather than attributing points to a house. It will be resisted, McGonagall said at the Founders' Council. The students currently winning are invested in the existing system. Yes, Harry said, change is resisted by the people who benefit from what's being changed. That's what change is. The transition took 3 years rather than 2 in practice, worked through with every head of house, but the principle held. Foundation Magic was, by then, in its 4th year as a first-year course, still taught by Harry in the Great Hall to every incoming cohort, a decision he had made early and never seriously revisited. By its 4th iteration, The course included a practical component, a controlled 60-second exposure to the castle's ambient awareness that reliably did what no theoretical instruction could: let students feel, rather than be told, the difference between magic performed and magic participated in. One Thursday in November, a first-year Slytherin set down her wand mid-spell, reached for the candle she'd been trying to light, and lit it without one. The Great Hall went quiet with recognition rather than surprise. "That's it exactly," Harry told her. "That's what magic feels like when it's working with you instead of through something." Well done. Dolores Umbridge arrived at the gate that 5th year with a ministry educational decree and a clipboard the ward truth registered. From the boundary, as carrying a primary intent, the suppression of students' capacity to know things she did not want them to know. The censure protocol activated automatically, and the gates, mid-opening for her carriage, simply did not finish. "Madam Umbridge," the gatekeeper portrait said. "A communication from the regents. The castle's ward truth has registered your magical intent as harm to students under the Founders' Charter's protection provisions. An exclusion has been activated. The gates will not open for you. I am arriving under Ministry Educational Decree. The decree is a ministry instrument. Hogwarts operates under the Founders' Magical Trust, which is not subject to it." She left, eventually after confusion, disbelief, and fury. From the upper windows, several hundred students produced a sound that was not quite a cheer and lasted longer than one. McGonagall held her expression neutral for exactly 4 seconds before the corners of her mouth moved. Snape's teaching review happened that spring. The ward truth had registered, across years, a consistent pattern of humiliation directed precisely at the students least able to absorb it. Neville Longbottom chief among them, and the Muggle-born first years still convincing themselves they belonged. The formal censure, delivered in the suite, cited specific documented instances. Snape read it in a stillness that was not his usual contained fury. "The ward truth cannot be argued with," he said after a long silence, and it visibly cost him to say it. "No," Harry said. "I do not concede the comparison easily," Snape said, after another pause. "I have watched several of your Foundation magic sessions from the corridor. The theoretical basis is not, fundamentally, different from what Potions requires. Potions is also intent-based, the precision considerable, but the mechanism the same. A student's relationship to the work determines its quality." He set the censure down with visible effort. "My classroom does not produce that relationship. The ward truth confirms what I have known and chosen not to examine. The faculty review includes a development framework," Hermione said, having stayed quiet through this, which was its own form of respect. "Not punitive. The censure is the record. The framework is what comes next, if you choose to engage with it. I would want access to Slytherin's library, the texts on magical intent and compound preparation." He was a potions theorist as well as a ward architect. "I'll arrange it," Harry said. He did not become a kind man. What he became, across the following 2 years, was more precise, rigor in service of students' development rather than diminishment. Neville Longbottom earned the highest potions OWL in his cohort the following year. Harry felt it through the ward truth's ambient register one Thursday morning and said nothing to anyone, evidence that didn't need announcing. The castle registered it as a small, specific warmth in the dungeon classroom. That was what it was for. They sat their NEWTs with everyone else, declining the exemption the Founders' Council had tentatively raised. Because the NEWTs were what the school offered its students at the end of 7 years, and they were students. Hermione achieved perfect scores in every subject, including 3 she had effectively designed the assessment framework for herself, the Wizarding Examinations Authority's reviewers, sent to assess a student, received a foundational text instead, and graded it outstanding. Harry achieved exceptional grades throughout, and the highest mark in only one subject, the defense practical. which the external examiner concluded had never been assessed at this level in the examination's recorded history. Grading framework insufficient. Recording as outstanding with notation. The question of what came next arrived in August. Hermione raised it herself, having thought about it for months. What does the Charter say about Regency after graduation? The succession protocol addresses investiture but treats duration as open. There's no term limit, no graduation clause. The founders were never students. They founded the place and remained its principals for their entire active lives. Which means the castle decides, Harry said. He went to the wall of the central chamber, the same one he'd touched on the first night, 7 years earlier, and asked the way he'd learned to ask things requiring the castle's own judgment, out loud, in words, with the genuine acknowledgement that the answer wasn't his to determine. What are we after this? What do you need us to be? The response was architectural. A new room opening through an arch in the Ravenclaw Library's eastern wall. A worktable, 2 chairs sized for adults. 2 desks positioned for independent work within the ward touch's full range. Shelves connected to a living catalog of every magical text in Britain. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing the grounds beyond the ward boundary, visible from inside its protection. An office. Permanent regents, Hermione said. The 4th generation, Harry said. The founders lived here their entire lives, she said. They built it and stayed and ran it until they couldn't anymore. We're not going to leave, Harry said. No, she agreed, we're not. She walked to one of the desks, ran her hand along its surface, taking possession of a space by acknowledging it through touch, and sat down. She opened her notebook. The years that followed resolved into life rather than drama, which was quieter and considerably more substantial. The ministry formally ratified the founders' magical trust in their 19th year, the process managed by Kingsley Shacklebolt, who had been among the Aurors arriving the night of the Death Eater assault. Sirius lived in Hogsmeade with Remus Lupin, visiting the castle often, becoming, without quite intending it, the person students sought when they needed advice that wasn't academic. Dumbledore remained headmaster another 11 years, his relationship with Harry and Hermione settling into something none of the standard categories quite described. McGonagall became headmistress at his retirement, and told her first heads of house meeting, once, "I was there the night the castle changed. I want this school to honor what it chose to become." She did not repeat it. In September of a year that was many years on, Harry and Hermione stood at the back of the Great Hall for the sorting, as they had learned to, for the better view of first-year's faces meeting the ceiling for the first time. "Do you remember what it felt like?" Hermione asked. "Walking in here the first time?" "The hum," Harry said. "Like a bell. I thought I was imagining it. So did I." The sorting continued. Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, the hat placing each student with the wisdom of something that had never mistaken the placement for more important than the person. Harry looked at the room, McGonagall at the high table, Sirius in the visitors' gallery where he had developed, over the years, a fondness for the occasion he'd be embarrassed to admit aloud. Hermione beside him with her notebook closed for once, simply watching, the thrones standing exactly where they had always stood, between the staff and the students, between the institution and the people it existed for. He thought of a cupboard under a stair in Surrey, a boy who had lived there 10 years without knowing what the hum in his chest meant, that it was a bell that had been ringing since before he was born, tuned to something in him the world had simply not yet confirmed. The Sorting Hat song that year included 4 lines it had not sung before, and would sing every year afterward, the regents watch from where they stand. The castle safe within their hand, what once was lost is found again. The founders' love, the founders' aim. Hermione wrote them down. The torches burned orange then for 10 seconds, undirected, the same way they had on the very first night, blue and gold, before settling back. The sorting continued. The castle endured, exactly where it had always been, doing what it had always done, noticing and responding, and being present to the people inside its walls. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.